Interesting column by Frank Rich, New York Times, called "The GOP Grand Old Party," which is the Republican Party, in Fantasyland. He says, quote, Mitt Romney is already slithering into the mists of history, or at least La Jala, gone and soon to be forgotten. A weightless figure, unloved and distrusted by even his own supporters. He was always destined, win or lose, to be a transitory frontman for the radical right GOP intent on barreling full speed down the Randian path laid out by its true 2012 standard bearer, Paul Ryan. But as was said of another unsuccessful salesman who worked the New England territory, attention must be paid to Mitt as the door slams behind him in the aftermath of Obama's brilliant victory. Though Romney has no political heirs in his own party or elsewhere, he does leave behind a cultural legacy of sorts. He raised truthfulness to a new level of chutzpah beyond Stephen Colbert's fertile imagination and on the grandest scale. What a presidential hopeful so cavalierly mendacious could get so close to the White House is extraordinary. The American weakness that Romney both hypothesized and exploited in achieving this feat are post-fact syndrome, where anyone on the public stage can make up anything and usually get away with it, won't disappear with him. A slicker liar could have won and still might. So Frank Rich is saying, good thing Romney's behind us, but there may be more slick liars to come. And if you watch the HBO show Boardwalk Empire, see all the slick liars in that show. And the first time when I saw Paul Ryan in public with this fancy suit on, he looked more like a gangster than anything credible, unfortunately. All politicians lie. Some of them, as Bob Kerrey famously said of Bill Clinton in '96, are unusually good at lying. Every campaign puts up ads that stretch or obliterate the truth, but Romney's record was exceptional by any standard. The blogger Stephen Binnen, who meticulously curated and documented Mitt's false statements during 2012, clocked a total of 917 lies. 917 lies told by Mitt. The last-ditch ads accusing a bailed-out Chrysler of planning to ship American jobs to China are not to be confused with the Romney flip-flops. The Etch-a-Sketches were a phenomenon of their own. If the left and right agreed about anything this year, it was that trying to pin down where Mitt really stood on any subject was a fool's errand. His biography was no less Jello-like. And there were the still opaque dealings at Bain and those Olympics and the single term in public service and his church going. And what else had he been doing for 65 years? We never did see those tax returns. We never did learn the numbers that might validate Romney-Ryan's budget, given the Romney team had about as much of a human touch with voters as an ATM. Yet some 57 million Americans took him seriously enough to drag themselves to the polls and vote for a duplicitous cipher. Wow, that's a strong word from Frank Rich. I'm sure they're not good personal friends, Romney and Rich. So, you gotta wonder, all these people that fall for Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity, and they're just falling like, they're like moths to the light. They're just blindly following the light, and they believe anything, and it's the believe anything crowd that's very, very dangerous right now. As Republican politicians and pundits pile on Romney in defeat, they often argue that he was done in by not being severely conservative enough. That people like Rush and Sean Hannity are picking on him for that. In truth, Romney was a perfect embodiment of the current GOP. As much as the Republican Party is a radical party, nearly all-white party, it has become the Fantasyland party. It's an isolated and gated community, impervious to any intrusions of reality from the real America it solipsistically claims to represent. This year's instantly famous declaration by the Romney pollster Neil Newhouse that we're not going to let our campaign be dictated by fact-checkers, that was an actual That was an actual quote from Neil Newhouse. We're not going to be dictated by the fact checkers. That is hilarious. I hadn't heard that before. The Republican faithful at strata, both low and high, from Russia's ditto heads to the think tank affiliated intellectuals, have long since stopped acknowledging any empirical evidence that disputes their insular worldview, no matter how grounded that evidence might be. God forbid science or any verifiable reality, like, say, elementary mathematics or global warming science. No wonder Romney shunned the word Harvard, which awarded him 2 degrees even more assiduously than he did Mormon. So at the policy level, this is the GOP that denies climate change, that rejects Keynesian economics, that identifies voter fraud where there is none. The Looney Tunes level, this is the GOP that has given us the birthers, the websites purporting that Obama was lying about Osama bin Laden's death. It's the GOP that demands the rewriting of history, still denying that Barry Goldwater's opposition to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Richard Nixon's Southern strategy transformed the party of Lincoln into a haven for racists. Such is the conservative version of history that when the website Right Wing News surveyed 43 popular conservative bloggers to determine the worst figures in American history 2 years ago, Jimmy Carter, Obama, and FDR led the tally, all well ahead of Benedict Arnold, Timothy McVeigh, and John Wilkes Booth. Now, the good news for Democrats this year was that the right brand of magical thinking or non-thinking bit the GOP in the butt. He didn't use the word butt there, persuading it to disregard all the red flags and assume even a figure as hollow as Romney could triumph. So there's Frank Rich right there. Some pretty interesting writing. He goes on and talks about the divorce from reality that the Republicans. This is a long article. I won't paraphrase all of it, but he concludes by saying that that's the Republicans' plight. The country has a larger problem: intellectual nihilism, as the writer Noam Schreiber recently labeled it. Noah Schreiber. Since 9/11, often but not always under the right's aegis, truth has been destabilized in America. The Bush administration's contempt for what it dismissed as the reality-based community was vindicated when it successfully ginned up a war by convincing Americans that 9/11 hijackers were Iraqis and that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. Our susceptibility to elaborate, beautifully wrought myths remains intact, whether they're being spun by politicians, captains of finance pumping up a bubble, or sports heroes like Lance Armstrong and Joe Paterno. Pretty strong stuff right there, huh? The fact checkers have predictably become partisan targets. So that the Republicans are taking aim at the fact checkers, which, you know, if you're in another country, France or India or England, or you've got to look at the United States and just laugh at they're taking the fact checkers not seriously. This is the objective truth, and the Republicans are denying the fact checkers have any meaning or relevance, which is just crazy. Daniel Patrick Moynihan might be surprised to learn that he's now remembered most for his oft-repeated maxim that everyone is entitled to his own opinion but not his own facts. Yet today most Americans do see themselves as entitled to their own facts, with one of our 2 major political parties setting a powerful example. For all the hand-wringing about Washington's chronic dysfunction and lack of bipartisanship, it may be the wholesale denial of reality by the opposition and its fellow travelers that is the biggest obstacle to our country moving forward under a much empowered Barack Obama in the second term. If truth cannot command a mandate, no one can. The powerful words of Frank Rich. That's one of the better columns I've seen in a long time.